could come in Saturdays and leave Sundays, so I'm quite sure I won't be here next Sunday, and you guys carry on without us. But it could be an ongoing thing, because the need is so great, and I have to be where the greater need is. And basically, I'm fitting all those 4 chapters kind of under one topic, which is Remember Me, God. But I'm just going to take the first one this morning to talk. Like point 1 is, for I regard the Lord's day and the Lord's house. That is, remember me, God. And I think you'll see where I'm going once we begin. So Nehemiah chapter 4:2 this morning. So hang in there with me. Chapter 5 in verse 19. In the book of Nehemiah, he said, remember me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. And it's like Nehemiah is saying, God, don't forget me, keep me in mind, I'm trying to do good. And look at me, Lord, for the good that I'm trying to do. And then in chapter, the last chapter, you can go to verse 14. My God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and for its servants. 22, and I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, the greatness of your mercy. And then we have verse 30 of the same chapter. Thus I cleanse them of everything pagan, to the priest and the Levites, each to his service, and to bring in the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times for good. So it's like 4 times Nehemiah spoke up in this. It's a prayer, and he said, God, remember me, Lord. I'm trying to do something good here, and remember me, Lord. Remember all that what I want us to pay attention to this morning, for just a moment anyway. He looked to God for his source of strength, for his source of protection. He looked to God. There was a time his life was endangered in Sanballat, and were out to kill him, just because they were trying to build back up their city. People always hated the Jews. They always tried to kill the Jewish people, Life. And then as governor, as he became governor, he had all his stress, all his responsibilities. And the only way unto God is to keep your focus on God, is to keep your eyes on him, is to look toward God. Because if you look at everything, and I'll tell you to pray a few times while I was up. Some of the leaders, at least Shannon that was with us, that was overseeing our department, and I could see that, and I prayed, out loud with that same sentiment, that we have to keep our eyes on God, because see, God's not in the wind, and he's not in the fire. That still small voice that God offers, that's the Lord. And it's so easy in your life as well. You have excitement, you have stirring, you've got issues. There's issues back home, issues going on everywhere. It's easy doing the church and gossip with this and gossip with that, and get caught up, and it's easy to get caught up on the struggles in your life. But rely upon God for your strength. Look to God for your protection. Keep going back. That's what Nehemiah did. He was governor. That's what we have to do as well if we're going to have some. Keep coming to God for that. Now, in the bottom part of chapter 10, it began to talk about Sabbath laws and Sabbath. Say to start with, we're not under these things. We're not under the rules of the Sabbath. There's certain commandments. The Sabbath was mainly a thing for the Jewish nation. It was for the tribes of Israel, and there were reasons for that. When we entered into the New Testament, and the focus was all upon Christ, and some of the focus still on God and Yahweh, but it was also now we have His Son, and He is God, and He rose on that began to worship Him at that point. But I want you to know that at the same time, though we may not be under the principle still apply. Okay? The principles of the Word of God still apply. And by the way, I found this verse to read to you, and I think that after you hear, you'll be glad we're not under the Sabbath law, because in Exodus 31:14, second to find it, the Bible said, "You shall keep the Sabbath. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death." And so one time, in fact, you can look up in Numbers, a scene, he went out picking up sticks on the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is the seventh day. That's what the Sabbath refers to, Sabbath. Everybody say Shabbat. Good job. And so, look at me like, did I say it right? It's all right what everybody's saying. So, and this message is all about sevens, okay? So you'll easily remember that. It's all about sevens. And Sabbath is the seventh day. The story of some of the people seeing this guy over there, and it was the Sabbath when they were supposed to be resting, and he was picking up sticks. And so they told on him, and then they got him. He was picking up sticks. And Moses said, well, according to the law, he has to be stoned to death. Now, I know, but it was the word of the Lord. And whatever God says, God is God. And we are not. Plague and death all in the camp. And so God don't play around when it comes to His laws. But aren't you glad you're not under the Sabbath? There'll not be one of us walking right today. Everybody be dead. I don't know who'd be left stoned. Right? We'd all be stoned to death. We'd all be killed. And on Sabbath, right? We've all done it. But we're not under that. But principles will still apply. Now, one of the things that was brought up was about to sell. And there were people who were coming into Jerusalem and coming into that area with wares to sell. And Nehemiah had to set the law down. In our messages up to this point, that the people had repented, and that the people, in that last message, they had entered into the cursing and the blessing. If you remember that message, and 6 of the Mount Ebal, and they shouted out the blessings and the cursings to the people, and as the people were going to go into the promised land. And so we had all that, and they signed an agreement to follow God. and to enter into all this. And then that brought us beginning to be revealed to the people who had come back to Jerusalem, and they didn't know about this, and they had their life. So he began by these Sabbath laws and ordinances. The first one dealt with in chapter 10, the bottom of it, going all the way down to chapter 10. It spoke about not buying and, not, let's see, not buying, not selling, all this was spoken of. And so it was just against the rules. It was against God. Shabbat is what they call it today. But they had another thing too, and it was referred to in a way as the Sabbath year. And so he spoke about that too in the bottom of chapter 10. The seventh day of the week holy, and there's a day of rest, but they were supposed to also keep that Sabbath year. And so this is known as the Shemitah. That's good. So Shemitah. And I remember the first time that I heard that word Shemitah, and I thought, well, that's a fun word. And so Dorothy said, Shemitah, so Shemitah. Around the house, so I was just having fun with that word. Again. So the Shemitah was the seventh year. In chapter 10, that the two main things that were covered that were to take place on the Shemitah year was they were not to farm the land, and that it was a time of release of debts. And so they had 7 years that they could farm the land. But then that seventh year, okay, that year after that, I guess the seventh to the eighth, not to farm, they were not to plant, and they were to leave whatever came up wild to the poor people and to the strangers. That was a good policy, by the way. God knows what he's doing. Today, they want to just fertilize the ground every time, right? They just want to keep pumping the fertilizer. Especially some of the older people that would separate property. They do this for a while, then they go to another piece of property, and let the land heal. God is important to God, and God wants, it's serious business. It's serious business when it comes to the seventh year that's going on. And by the way, you're going to see before the lesson's over today that God uses this seventh Gentiles too, as well as Judah. Now we don't have to keep the Shemitah. It is important that we let the land rest, or else all the nutrients. We're not going to be able to grow food and grow it right if we rob the ground of all its natural nutrients. But these things tie to the blessings and cursings of God. If we don't obey, and they didn't obey the Sabbath laws, the Shabbat and the Shemitah, if they didn't obey this, then calamity could. That seventh year, every seventh year, they not only didn't farm the land, but they were to release the debts. And that's what the word Shemitah. That's what it means, release. Release. To release the land, to release care of the national debts. There'd be no national deficit in Israel when they were following this. And people were set free every 7 years of the debts that they had. Now, I can't search that for yourself and see what comes up with. I mean, I don't know if, I just don't know the details. I have these questions in my mind when I think about it too. But here in America, at times we have had. And I'll tell you, sometimes you get to the point where the only way it's going to be resolved is to do that with it. Now, it points out in verse 32, verse 33, that they were to support the temple, support into some different things about how they were given the crops and support the Levites, support the workers, support the temple, make sure the temple had the bread and it had the grain and the Levites were fed and stuff like that. They were to give unto the priests first fruits, of their crops to the Lord, which would go toward the temple and would support the priests and stuff like that. Were to give their tithe. Now, I don't think today that we're under this Levitical law of tithing to the church, and even though it's very popular still amongst our churches, we have 12 tribes here. We don't have one tribe set aside to preach in the churches and so forth and so on. But however, principles again apply. And that person's got to be supported by the people of that ministry. And if we are going to have a building to meet in, if we want some heat, if we want some air conditioning, if we want lights and stuff, then the principles apply that we've got to keep these things up. And so, but however, principles still apply, and in the eyes of God, they're just as important. And if we don't step into those principles today, then the curses of God can come upon our life, is what can happen. So these kind of things of sevens real quick to you, because I kind of subtitled it like the importance of the seven, importance of the seven. And I'm only I think you're going to be amazed by some of the stuff I found, and I can't even, we don't have time, and I don't have See, 7 is a number in Bible numerology that speaks of perfection. It speaks of in 7, when 7 occurred. Now, why God chose 7, I have no idea. But I can just take it, and you see God with 7. So what does it mean? It means that when you see things lining up in particular patterns like that, then that's probably God. And God is a Bible student that's looking into here and he's seeing it, that, hey, this is me. I'm involved for some reason, some way. And either blessings or through that, meaning judgments of God. You do know, of course, that God created the world, right, in 6 days, and he rested on the 7th. And that's why he made the 7th day holy, and he said it should be a day of rest. And yes, we need a day, and it doesn't really matter today which day it is, but Sunday's just as good as any day, and most people are not working the weekends. Fewer people, we ought to have one day out of every week that we can just stop and let the body relax. God didn't create this body to work 7 days a week. Now, he didn't do that. And a person that's going to do that is going to wear himself or herself out. We ought to have a day set aside, and Sunday and to set aside every week to worship God. That's the principle. Now, if you don't do that, then things are not going to go as well with you, because you're not honoring God with the method God set aside. It doesn't matter what God did. Now, Judah had turned away from God and backslidden, and God allowed the wicked Babylon to come in, Nebuchadnezzar to come in and destroy Israel, destroy the temple. We call it the battle. It was because of the Shemitah was the reason it lasted that long. And now I think this is interesting, because you can check up 2 Chronicles, the last chapter, chapter 36. Why he gave them 70 years of captivity was because they had abused the Shemitah and the Shabbat. They had abused that. And so God gave them 70 years that the land may have the same amount of time to use that land. Okay? It's important. That's what I'm saying. These things are important to God. And we can act like it really don't matter and it don't matter. But I wouldn't go. Daniel spoke about the 70th week. And Daniel is the prophetic book of the Old Testament, like Revelations is to the New Testament. Daniel spoke of the 70th week, the 70th week. And weeks of years. 69 of those weeks of years has passed. Then we're in a lull between the 69th and the 70th. That's where we're living at today. Ever since Christ died upon the cross, ended the 69th week, and then we're waiting for the 70th week to begin. The 70th week begins with tribulation. Interesting. Talks about the 7 years of tribulation. And look, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, I couldn't come up with all this. So Daniel 7:7 talks about 7 years of tribulation, where there are 7 churches and 7 church ages. Then 7 seal judgments come upon the earth. 7. And so he began this world under this principle of 7. Everything with 7s. Okay, and don't get the idea, by the way, that 7, that God working in groups of 7. Ain't nobody saying it. There are some things, a few things, that were for Israel only, like ceremonial rules and regulations, and such as I mentioned this morning. To us today, and God using the 7 right on, and he uses 7s even amongst the Gentile people, even amongst America, in groups of 7. Now understand why I'm saying that doesn't mean God has to work that way. Wait until 7 years and then do what he's going to do. And God works anytime God wants to work. It's just that there's so many 7 to the point that we need to take notice of the cycle that God moves in. And understand it. Blessings that can come when people are obedient to the 7 when they are not. For instance, in America we had this building called the World Trade Center. Everybody familiar with that? That World Trade Center, they named it that because there was finance. Not just America, but in the entire world. I mean, it was known was a global market. It was huge. And because of that, and this building one of the high, but it was a huge, high building, it really became known as the financial symbol of America, and even many the building of financial security for America. America relied upon that for their financial security, which they should not have. Don't serve money, at least we're not supposed to. Because no man can serve God and mammon, Jesus said. God and money. As long as you ain't serving it. You answer to it, you can't be open for God, and you can't work for God because no. And we have to choose whom we will serve, is what we have to do. But the World Trade, right? They built back a new one, right? That rose up. Now, understand, biblically speaking, the tower the rising of a tower speaks of defiance. That's what it speaks of. And if you go back and you think about and you research Babel and the tower that they built to reach up into heaven, you begin to understand where I'm going here. So once it was destroyed, they kind of changed the name of the World Trade Center to One World Trade Center. That's right. Isn't that kind of eerie? The Bible being fulfilled and the Bible being prophesied, because we're on our way to a one world government. We're on our way. When the rapture takes place, we're building up to it. So it's no longer a call. You say, well, that's the name. Get serious about the Bible, folks, and you're gonna sense it in your spirit and understand the truth. It's now the One World Trade Center. They build it higher. And the thing about it is America is reliant on America. That's reliant upon God. And I think that the reason disaster came upon in Washington, because it was judgment from the Almighty, because America is turning away from God. The original World Trade Center was conceived in 1945. Now you check on me on this, okay? I don't mind. 1945. That just happened to be a Schmidt year. Schmidt year. Okay? It was destroyed in 9. Schmidt year. Oh, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. It was conceived 1945 as Schmidt year, but they began breaking the ground though in 1966, which just happened to be Schmidt year. So it was completed. It was dedicated on Schmidt year when it was dedicated on that 7-year cycle. It was destroyed 9/11/2001. And in fact, not only was it a Schmidt year, the day it was destroyed, the exact day was on the Jewish calendar, which is the very end and the beginning, the day of when the Schmidt year would begin. That is, it was from the 7th, that was the exact day, the 7 years up to the 8th year. So anything that happened through that year cycle was they looked at as that was taking place. And so, did you know that the largest point loss, we always think about the Great Depression, but the largest up until that point, up until that year, it actually took place on Wall Street, and the stock market 7 points in one day. Some of you remember that we had a terrible financial thing. Destruction of that building, it plummeted to the greatest number it's ever been, 777 points. Look it up. And $2 trillion vanished, was gone. That people had invested in stuff. It was wiped out. It was a Schmidt year, and it corresponds exactly that 7 years later from the time it was destroyed was Elul 29. It's crazy. And then you can go one more. And there was another greatest point loss happened exactly 7 greatest point loss of a single day. It's like, do you think today that this had nothing to do with God? Oh, this was just a terrorist trying to strike. How do you explain explain everything, ending up with 7 that's taking place. Oh, it doesn't stop there, but it goes on and on and on. This morning, as a child of God, a student of the Scripture, that God is speaking. The sad thing is that America is a backslidden nation. America's gone the way of Israel, and that's has gone the way of Judah before their captivity. America has. You know, we do all the same things. Right? Today we have said. Okay? We even have the satanic club, and we even have satanic temples here in America, and it's okay. It's their thing, right? How we have our pagan gods and their temples set up across America, and we even innocent babies today, and it's been going on since when? 1960. So many of our own. What's the that they did when they sacrificed their child to Moloch, or to sacrifice it to Baal God? Today, we hang a pride sign in our God's holy ordinance and institution of marriage today. But and it's okay to maybe have a personal Bible club at church, as long as you are Baptist. You can't be a Pentecostal. You can't have any doctrine that relates to any particular. Well, how in the world are you going to have Bible like that? But yet we have satanic clubs that are set up in some schools that are pulling the kids away. America on earth other than Israel, America is the only nation who was founded upon faith and faith in God, and that's the reason America is headed for judgment. And just like they did in the Bible, every man does what's right in their own eyes, and that's where we are. And it's a tragic thing. A remnant. He has a remnant of followers. And we as his followers, going on around us, and we need to be careful not to be sucked into the culture of our day. The gospel becomes more watered down like it is in many of our churches, and the truth is not spread because it might hurt somebody's feelings. It's not politically correct. But there's a big difference between political correctness and what God's Word teaches. Folks, keep this in your heart. And dig into that. Dig into that stuff. It's just wild and crazy. And the truth needs to be. As long as you trust in God, as long as you have repented and you believe in any other name but Jesus Christ, and as long as you've done that, you've got to have the joy in your heart. And then no matter what goes on around you, you know when the time comes, though, we continue. I mean, I fully believe that what took place up there is, I'm past my time, sorry. That's God shaking. It's God shaking America. That's what's going on.